Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card video. Today's card is watercolor and it uses this center cut flower stamp by Simon Says Stamp. You can actually remove the middle part for a smaller set of flowers. I'm just going to be using the outline. So I'm going to use my large MISTI and just kind of put it right there nice and snug in the corner. And then I'm going to take a pen and mark the middle of this center, and I just have a piece of grid sheet underneath it. And once I have the center marked, then I'm going to put the stamp on the lid and get my cardstock. I have Strathmore 90-pound watercolor paper, and I'm going to take that grid sheet and kind of go up the line where I made that center mark so that I could see it outside of my cardstock. And I'm going to center it. I'm counting the boxes here to make sure that the center of my cardstock is right there on that purple mark that I drew. And now I'm going to stamp this down. Now the reason why I'm moving this a little bit is because I want this very large stamp to be centered on this piece of cardstock. And to do that, I kind of have to move it a little bit. It actually turns out to be a ½ inch from the right side of the MISTI. I inked it up with Versamark ink, and I'm going to put some white embossing powder on it and heat it to set it. I'm using my distress markers for my coloring. I want to have 2 different color sets for my flowers. So what I'm going to do is keep one in common, which is going to be the abandoned coral. I'll combine that with the scattered straw for one flower, and then I'll combine it with the wilted violet for the other flower. I'm using the number 2 brush from this artist set of brushes by Ranger. You want a small brush because there's a lot of detail in this image. So I'm going to use a technique that I've used multiple times before. It's really, really easy. What I'm going to do is take my first color, in this case scattered straw, and I'm just going to color the bottom of each petal. Then I'll take my abandoned coral and I'm going to color the top of each petal. So I'm going to leave a little bit of space between each color. Now I put some water on my brush. I'm just going to kind of dab it in there. I'm not going to do much blending. I'm just going to kind of wiggle it around, really, not brushing, just wiggling, just to make sure that I get water all over the entire petal and I get those colors moving on their own. You can see that I'm moving my brush really just side to side and not up and down. And that way I don't mix the colors too much together because these are really small areas and you'd be surprised how well water just does all the work on its own. Here is my flower with the other 2 colors. I'm going to start with the abandoned coral at the base, working up the same way as I did before. But with these 2 colors, because they're both pretty bright, I'm not going to put as much color on each petal. So here's my wilted violet, which is a pretty dark color, and so you can see I'm not putting quite as much marker on the cardstock, but I am doing the same technique. So I'm going to grab my brush with some water and I'm going to again wiggle it around, move it side to side, but not so much up and down. Now these 2 colors, the abandoned coral has a little bit of orange in it, and orange and purple really don't mix very well. So if you do too much blending or you get these colors too close together, they could get kind of muddy looking or brownish looking. So you want to be careful to keep them a little bit more of a distance apart. The closer you get your 2 colors on each petal, the darker the flower will be. So there are some flowers you'll notice as I move along here that are a little bit darker, and that's because I added a little bit more abandoned coral, maybe a little bit more wilted violet. I actually think it looks better when you vary the colors just a little bit because then it looks a little more realistic. I'm just going through all these flowers and doing them the exact same way. I'm not working on flowers that are next to each other, so I give them a chance to dry. That way I don't have them blending into each other if they're still wet. It took me about an hour to complete this card from start to finish. I thought it would be fun to keep all the coloring in because it's kind of nice to see how the card comes together. So I've fast forwarded this quite a bit. I'm just going to let it go here and turn up the music, and you can fast forward to the end or you can watch the coloring. Now that my flowers are finished, I'm moving on to the leaves. I have mowed lawn and twisted citron. And I'm going to color these really quickly, and it's very easy. I'm just taking my mowed lawn first, and I'm just drawing a line on each one of my leaves kind of randomly, sometimes next to the white outline, sometimes on the inside, sometimes on the outside. And then when I'm done with the mowed lawn, I'm just going to draw again lines with my Twisted Citron. And then just like I did with the flowers, I'm going to go in with my brush, but I can't really keep it still because I have to move around a little bit because the leaves are bigger. So I'm just going to barely tap in some water and let the water do the work. But the key is to not brush too much. So you just want to kind of move the water around so that it hits all areas of the leaf, but then you want to stop because otherwise you'll get just one shade of green, and you want to have those two different shades because it looks a lot prettier. All right, once again, I'm just going to move through this really quickly, and I will be back when the coloring is finished. This stamp also has some added circles here and there, so I took my squeezed lemonade. I just colored them in. I'm not going to add any water. I just thought yellow would be a really pretty bright color, sort of add just some pop to these flowers. Next, I'm going to do the background. This is weathered wood, and because I used white embossing powder, I think it's nice to put some color behind it, and it makes your outline stand out a little bit more. So I put some on my craft mat, and I'm pulling it up with a tiny bit of water, and I'm using that same number 2 brush. Now for my first step, I'm just going along the outside because there are a lot of detailed areas and it's going to take me some time. And if I combine it with the center of my card, then it will give water spots and it won't be even and consistent. And you'll see what I mean in a second. Now that my outside is done, I'm going to work on the inside. I'm going to be really careful to keep this area wet. I don't want any water staining. I want it to be really nice and even and consistent. So I'm going to put some of the weathered wood right up against those flowers, and then I have my water jar to my left, and so I'm going to constantly be picking up that water right after I lay down some of that color. So I'm laying down some of the color right here, and then I'll grab some water and put a bunch of water on there, and make sure you push the water all the way back to the edge to avoid water staining. I'm working at a pretty brisk pace. And that is because once the color dries, then I'm more likely to get those water staining lines. And I don't want to get that. I want this to be nice and smooth. So I'm just going to work through this whole inside, and I'm going to color along the edge and then pull it out with a bunch of water. This Strathmore watercolor paper, which is 90 pound, absorbs water really well. I barely had any warping, which is really nice about this paper. Once again, I left all of the coloring in here, so I'm just going to speed it up and finish it quickly. All right, that completes the background. I think it looks a lot better with the gray in the background. Now I'm going to have a black sentiment in the middle. So to add a little bit of extra black to sort of coordinate with that, I'm going to color all of these insides with a black Stampin' Up! Marker. The sentiment die is by Simon Says Stamp. It's called Painted Friend. I'm going to cut that out of some black cardstock. The Bejeweled set by Altenew has a little hello in it, so I'm going to use that. Once I position it where I want it, I'm going to make a little pencil mark under the D so that I'm going to take it off, put some 2A glue on it, and I can put it right back in that same spot. The I in the word is a separate piece, so I'm going to also glue that on with some 2A glue. And then I'll put it in the MISTI and stamp hello with some VersaFine black onyx ink. And then I'm going to adhere this to a basic gray card base by Stampin' Up!, just using an ATG tape runner. Now I trimmed this panel so that it was 1/8 inch shorter on the top and the bottom, so I could have some gray showing. And then I'll put a white insert on the inside of the card so I can write my message. And that is the card for today. I really like the way this came out. I like the colors of the flowers, and this technique is a really easy technique to do. So I hope you'll try it at home, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.